thank you very much, Claire, for doing a live stream with me. I really appreciate it. My plan is to go through a ton of really important things within the topics we've agreed. The first one is going to be about why has the Islamic stroke happiness stroke justice revolution started. And but before we talk about our first question, I think a quick intro is useful. My own little introduction is I'm a Muslim, but I want lots of people to benefit from Islam, even if they don't become Muslim. I do recommend becoming Muslim, taking on the whole package. We were discussing short intros about, I mean, what's your short intro about yourself that would intrigue people?
My short intro would be that I'm agnostic. I'm an agnostic non-Muslim promoting Sharia because I see it as a source for social conservatism and a way of uniting social conservatives of all races and religions. And I speak as a moral and political philosopher and a political scientist. I think it would work because of how the laws are created, the laws are articulated in the Quran. And sorry, it's not very short. Shall I start again?
No, it's really hard to say things in a way that everybody can understand. Some people might not understand this whole thing about conservatism. But would it be fair to say that even though you don't necessarily, or you're not sure about the existence of God, or if Islam is actually from God, you feel like it fixes everything in society?
Yes, indeed, simply because it gives us rules, and well, there are plenty of people who don't like rules. They would also have to admit that laws are necessary to control us. You know, all these atheists who say, oh, religion is just a fairy story to control us. And, you know, I would have no difficulty saying, yes, of course it is. And, you know, that's what the law is for, to stop us from doing stuff that, you know, would probably be not good for us or others.
And what is your favorite Sharia law then? Let's just get started with that as a short intro. Is there anything that comes to mind?
Well, for my political purposes, I would have to say it's chapter 24, verse 2, because it just makes a point about what is necessary to make people respect the institution of marriage again. But really my favorite
what is that? But could you tell me what is in that verse?
Yes, it's the 100 lashes verse, which is, and I interpret it as treating as sex offenders unmarried parents.
Right, okay.
So you would incur a penalty of 100 lashes if you were caught having children without a marriage certificate. That would be my way of putting it.
Right, and the reason why you think that's such a great law, and I agree, but I want to hear it from yourself. Why do you think it's such a great law?
Because it would be the only law capable of sending the message to everybody about what is expected of them and what is allowed and what isn't allowed. So you wouldn't need any more, you know, sex education classes saying, you know, do it if it feels good, if you trust a person. You know, it's saying don't do it, you know, unless you've got the ring on your finger, girl, and don't even think of doing it if you know she's not married to you, because you're going to get into trouble. And that's a very clear and succinct message that, you know, even the learning disabled can understand.
Yep, so I agree that it's very simple, clear, and it's not the only method by which Islam tries to encourage you to do the right thing, but sometimes if you can't understand the more subtle, intelligent arguments, then as you say, even if you have a learning disability, you can understand it's a pretty dangerous thing to do. I mean, it has consequences of having sex outside marriage, and so that's what Islam does. It uses both fear and hope for a better future, and fear if you do the wrong thing. And there are different things, different methods are needed for different kinds of people. So thank you for that. If I was to share my favorite Sharia law, quite on the other side of the spectrum, and that is, but it's all part of the same package, and that is paradise is for the generous. It was the home of the generous. And by the way, paradise in Islam is something you experience in this life and the next. So essentially it's saying you will find happiness if you are generous, and that's a really important message in our day and age, where we think it's all about, in our individualistic society, it's all about what we can get, and we're going to be happy if we just have more and more stuff to ourselves and don't share with other people. And from my experience, going in, living in different countries, the happiest places by far are the ones where people do things for each other. Doing things for yourself is just a recipe for being lonely. Any thoughts about that?
Well, that sounds an excellent way of increasing happiness and, making people happy, and therefore nicer to each other, because we're always nicer to people when we are, feeling there is justice in the world. But before we move on to another topic, I feel that I might come across as being a little mean when I say, my favorite verse is the 100 lashes verse. I meant to say that it's non-negotiable because it's so important to emphasize this. But really, my favorite verse, which is, I think most people will be able to agree on, is what I think is a First Amendment verse, which says there is no compulsion in belief, truth stands clear from error, and I'm anxious to make Americans understand that their First Amendment is actually based on this verse.
Wow, I love that. Yes. And that's a big misconception in Islam. People think, and generally about religion, I think, people think religion is something that's forced on people. Well, clearly in Islam, it's let's say, I shouldn't actually speak for other religions, because in the Bible it doesn't say that you have freedom of faith, but Islam does. So yeah, that's really important. So I've just put in the private chat the question, so you can put it on the screen if you like, Claire. Yeah. And then I'm gonna start going through some more questions. So, or I should say statements. So, the heart of what I'm gonna say, and the people who are watching might think we're just going to be agreeing. I picked this topic because I think we're gonna disagree as to the method by which this revolution is going to happen. So the question we're talking about, or that we're going to discuss, is: has the Islamic happiness justice revolution started? And I'm going to start my inspiration from this verse of the Holy Quran. Truth has come and falsehood becomes ineffective by it. Falsehood does indeed vanish away fast. Now, it might be a bit cryptic at first as to what relation that has to the answer to the question, but hopefully it will unfold in time as we go along. My first statement, and I want to see what you think about it, is the Islamic truth grassroots revolution is hard for the elites to stop because there's no one target. What do you think about that? Because I think that's going to get into the method by which the revolution is happening and is going to continue. And people who are listening might be wondering, why would we debate this? Because I think let me see if I'm right. You have a belief that there's going to be a top-down revolution, where if we have the right laws in place, people will behave. And I'm saying that actually the revolution necessarily has to be a grassroots revolution, and one reason it necessarily has to be a grassroots revolution is that as soon as you pick somebody to lead the way, the elites who are running things the way they are at the moment, they won't be happy about it and they'll target you. So, for example, if you're Mr. Tate, Andrew Tate, they'll put you in prison. They're not happy about you standing up and going against the mainstream narrative. What are your thoughts about that, first of all?
Well, I think there will always be opposition to anything you do if it is perceived that what you're doing is threatening. And clearly they find masculine leadership very, very threatening indeed. And I guess its imprisonment is a warning from the matriarchy to those who seek to challenge it to well, not bother. That is how I interpret events.
Okay, so do you see that it's harder? I don't want to make this the main point though, but do you see it's harder to have a target if everybody is the target? So if there's a
Yes, I do see
massive,
what you mean now.
yeah,
Yes, because if you know, if all these leaders keep popping up and they all keep getting imprisoned, then you're saying that the revolution will never happen. And
if it depended on a few people, but if everybody is the revolution simultaneously, or not exactly simultaneous, but largely an uprising, and everybody's going, hey, this is the truth. Islam is the truth, and it's got the answers, and there's how many people can you put into prison?
yes, and also it seems that they're conflicted about whether just to ignore people like Andrew Tate or put them in prison, because you know they by putting him in prison they draw attention to him and martyr him, and that might encourage even more martyrs. So I think they're already on a sticky wicket there.
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, to ignore it would feel as if they're not doing enough to stop it. But perhaps it's unstoppable.
Well, I would say it is unstoppable, but I will talk about why in a bit. So let's talk about, has the revolution started? And I will say it has. And what is the revolution? It's the truth revolution, first of all. It's the truth getting out. And as the verse of the Holy Quran I mentioned before, truth has come and falsehood becomes ineffective by it. So what I mean by that is this truth is so powerful that it makes the falsehood so clearly false that it effectively destroys it and weakens it. And so that is the revolution. It's changing people's ways of thinking, and it's doing that on a number of levels. I quickly point them out. One is it's just simply more logical, and good ideas beat bad ones. But then there's the practical side of it. You can see the fruits of that truth through community and relationships and families and things like that. Islam has all of that, whereas the rest of Western society is collapsing and losing all of it. So what are your thoughts about that?
Well, it is clear that the West no longer has a functioning moral system. If you ask them what it is, it's even controversial. I don't know if you remember David Cameron, when he was Prime Minister, said Britain is a Christian country, and there was an explosion of controversy because there were so many British people who didn't think that Britain was a Christian country. And you think, well, what is it then? What is our moral system? And is it conservatism or is it liberalism? And why did David Cameron talk about muscular liberalism and not muscular conservatism? And this ideology seems to be very confused in Australia, where the Liberal Party is really the Conservative Party down under. And there's a lot of ideological confusion, I think.
Okay. Would you say that I'm just intrigued by to what extent you think Islam has just the best ideas? Uh, to is that the cause for the revolution that's happening in terms of ideas at the moment? Like it's because it's the fastest growing religion in the world. Um, fast, is it just because of the ideas are better than other ideas, or is it the lack of other ideas? What are your feelings?
Well, I think the five world religions are all about encouraging us to marry and have children and be good parents in order to continue with our civilization. And that, I think, is the basic purpose of all religions. And we know that they all enjoy a different kind of status. They're not all equal. I think the Eastern religions are not particularly well regarded since they didn't acquire global empires. Um, it's actually Christianity that acquired three global empires, but even then, Christians and Muslims are always complaining about Jews being God's chosen people. So arguably, you could say, well, Jews are the most high status people because look at these people who have their empire and they're still complaining about them, and therefore, it seems obvious to me that there's only really two religions if you're a Westerner, if you want to worship the most powerful being conceivable, which is the Abrahamic God who created the universe. And if Christianity is no longer working, well, there's only one religion, isn't there?
Hmm. Okay, which is Islam.
Mm.
So I'm just thinking in terms of ideas without delving into too much. Have you tried comparing Islam with Judaism? Because I think that's your second choice. If is am I right?
Oh, well, I wouldn't want to be Jewish because they were so restrictive. And it has 36 capital offences, and any little thing you do, you break the Sabbath, it's death for you. Bow before idols, it's death. Blaspheme, it's death. I guess over the centuries, they've probably, they've kind of diluted the whole thing and say, oh, it doesn't really mean death. Being a drunken and disobedient son, it doesn't really mean death, even though that's what it says. So I think the confusion for them is that they have so many death penalties, but they're also apparently trivial, that they basically said, oh, God didn't really mean it. But I mean, who are they to say God didn't really mean it?
Hmm.
Well, I guess, the Quran is fairly liberal. It says things like no death penalty unless the interests of justice require it, which is fair enough. And, most people won't quarrel with that. So because it seems so much fairer, I guess, it seems to be the rational religion to choose if you're looking for one.
Yeah, I think it's the most balanced religion that you can actually apply in real life. You can't keep killing everybody just because they didn't practice the Sabbath, for example. Um, Right, and also for me, it's the only scientific religion, and I think there are a lot of Jews who are leaving Judaism um, because I don't think they see it as a rational religion. There are many things, lots of brutal things in the Bible that don't seem to quite add up. Um, and Islam only has violence if it's for self-defense, which I think is quite reasonable. Um, yeah. Okay. Cool. And then let me just. I think the other. I had some ideas that I wanted to go through, and one of them is this idea that the reason what the reason why Islam is or can be a powerful idea is not just because it's logical, not just because its rules work, which are two very important ideas. But this is something I wanted to ask you what you think about is Islam is powerful because of the idea that it is supported by God and God has never left us. And I think what I'm trying to, one thing I want to get across, which I think is mainstream Islam is losing to some extent, even though it's doing quite well, is that it. it says that there are no more prophets, and it makes the idea of a prophet a myth of the past. What do you feel about that before I go into that in any more detail?
I suppose it's necessary for Islam to say this is the final revelation, because otherwise there will be attempts to change the laws of God.
Hmm.
So
So I'm not talking
for this
about.
reason,
So
I say
I
it would make
agree.
sense.
I agree that it's the final revelation, but I disagree that there will be no more prophets after Prophet Muhammad. Because if you say that, first of all, it's actually against the Quran, but that's a whole different debate. But if you say that, it makes the idea of religion almost. I'm not sure if this is like the idea that no more prophets or no more uh, no more people with spiritual insight can come forward or a relationship with God turned religion into this mythological story that only maybe 1,000 years ago did this happen, but it no longer happens now. It's
Oh, you mean it turns it into a dead religion with no further revelation? Is that what
yeah, it's
you...
just the idea of this just happened in the past, but it no longer happens now. Yeah, in some sense, I could say it's a dead religion, um, and it's far more powerful if we know that that story hasn't ended. It seems a bit strange that you tell a story that all these wonderful things happened. There were thousands of prophets, and then when it got to us, it stopped. There's something suspicious about that, and something not right, as if it's just mythology. It's not something,
Mhm.
and maybe that's one reason why I say maybe subconsciously, maybe that's why you don't believe it's actually a message from God. I don't know, but
Well, I suppose there might be a confusion between final prophet and final messenger, because I suppose, you have to say Muhammad is a final messenger to make clear that the
yeah,
Quran is a final revelation.
yeah,
But I think, as far as prophets are concerned, I see them as successful revolutionaries. I mean,
right.
you are raised in status if you are not only a successful revolutionary, but considered a prophet. But I think, that there has been a practice of killing prophets, which the Jews were guilty of doing, because, well, I suppose it's the nature of the job. If you're going to be a revolutionary, you will have a price on your head.
Right, okay, so let's talk about revolutionaries. So I'm a follower of a prophet after Prophet Muhammad, and the Quran actually does say that if you're a good Muslim, you can be a prophet. Not everybody can be a prophet, but you can be, and I think that's very reasonable, and actually very unreasonable to say that there should be no more prophets after, as long as they follow the teachings of the Quran, as long as they don't
Which
change.
verse is this?
There's a verse that says that if you, and I quickly grab it actually since you asked. Let me grab it here. It's quite easy to find. Islam, Quran. Um, Basically, it says if you listen to God and you follow Prophet Muhammad, you can be amongst the prophets. I'm just doing a quick search. Prophets, the truthful, the martyrs, and the righteous.
What is the
So,
chapter and verse?
have I got it yet? Let me just see. Uh, so I count the first verse, Bismillah, as the first verse, but a lot of people don't. So by a lot of people's standards, it'll be chapter 4, verse 69. Um,
469. Okay.
yeah, okay. And it says, and whosoever obeys Allah and this messenger, which is Prophet Muhammad, he shall be among those who will get the blessings of either being a prophet, the truthful, a martyr, or the righteous. And it is claimed that you can only stand next to these things, which is quite an insulting translation, because that means you cannot even be a righteous person. You can only stand next to them in heaven, according to mainstream Islam. So it is a bit of an in-depth discussion as to why, it basically is a desperate attempt to not believe in a prophet after Prophet Muhammad, even though all Muslims are waiting for Jesus to come back, which is a contradiction in itself. Jesus is a prophet; he's still alive. He exists, after Prophet Muhammad. Therefore, the idea that there's no prophet at all after Prophet Muhammad is already contradicted there.
Yes, I think we still need heroes, don't we?
Yes, and also you need unity as well. And Islam does not have unity. It's all over the place. Even then, it's still growing. It's still so far more powerful than any of the other religions because it's simply logical. Like Judaism is not logical. It says, the universe is created in 6 days and all sorts of other things that don't add up. But Islam is the only one that's 100% scientifically accurate. And all the other religions after that really don't make any sense. Like, there are three God, the Trinity makes zero sense. And then you've got Buddhism and Hinduism. Hinduism says God is blue and has many hands and is a cow at different times, and all sorts of other things you just can't take seriously. Buddhism, mainstream Western Buddhism says, we'll be talking about it later on, it says there's no God and logically there must be a God. But anyway, I am desperately trying to make as much progress as possible. That is a very important question that you asked. One thing I'm going to see what you think about this. So, I put down the return of the Khalifas. So, Prophet Muhammad said in the latter days in which we are now, that the Khalifas would return. So, Khalifa or Caliphs are the people who are supposed to unite the Muslims, because Muslims are not supposed to be in lots of different groups. And so there's a very clear prophecy that has been fulfilled. Okay, he said, I'll just try to read it really quickly, but prophethood would remain among you, Prophet Muhammad said, as long as Allah wills. Then Allah the Exalted would raise it up, and then caliphate on the precepts of prophet would be established and remain among you as long. I think I've copy pasted it slightly wrong, but basically, in short, it says that there would be a true caliphate, then it would turn into sort of a dictatorship, despotic rule, and then it would become, I think,
Which verse is this, out of interest?
So this is a saying of Prophet Muhammad in Mishkan.
Oh, that's from the Hadith.
Hadith, yes, that's right.
Right.
Okay, but it's not like it's not really disputed. But once a prophecy has been fulfilled really accurately, then it's even harder to say it's incorrect. So I would say, in summary, what's happened is that there was a caliphate, which is, most people agree, at least for the first four, were truly guided. But then it turned into a sort of kingship, and then a tyrannical kingship, and then it ended in the Ottoman Empire, where they also had a caliphate. And at the moment that one finished, the caliphate that I am following started, and it started on following a prophethood, which is exactly what the prophecy said would happen. So a lot of things, let's say, are coming together in a strange way in very exact times, and the reason why I'm pointing this out, why am I pointing this out? Two main reasons. One is that the idea that God is with us is very powerful. And if there are constantly prophecies that are appearing and being fulfilled in our times, it makes us realize that we're not alone with just pure ideas, the ideas of the Koran, but we've got the hand of God supporting and making sure this revolution happens. So God is, so I think that's sort of important, and I mean, it definitely is important, but I'm not sure how well I'm making that clear. It's just the idea of the return of the Khalifas, which means unity, but also means God is with us. And I think that's pretty important. Any thoughts on that before I move on to something else?
You seem to be saying that this should be the aspiration of the Ummah, the return of the Caliphate. Is that what you're saying?
It is actually an aspiration of the Ummah, which is the Muslims, basically the family of Muslims is what the Ummah means. It is. They desperately want one because nobody likes the idea of many sects all going in different directions and not being united. Islam is never supposed to be like that. It's totally wrong. So they all want a Khalifa, but they can't. And so the only people who've managed to have a Khalifa are the Ahmadiyya Muslims, who've had it for over 100 years. And so we're called the non-Muslims, yet strangely, if they believe God is all powerful, all wise, and in control of things, why would he allow the wrong people to have the caliphate, and all the so-called right people just cannot manage to get a Khalifa together? Any thoughts about that?
Well, I was just thinking about how it would be if just supposing all the countries in the world were Muslim, who would be the caliph? It would have to be the most powerful nation on earth who was also Muslim, wouldn't it? I mean, wasn't that how it worked in the olden days?
No, it doesn't. I mean, yes, in a way it does. It did, but that wasn't the true caliphate, and it had a lot of issues in itself. One side fighting another. Nobody really believed that after the four first caliphates, not everybody agreed on who the Khalifa was, and if he was truly guided by God, and if you should listen to him. So there's a lot of problems if you pick a Khalifa like a king, but it's very different if you believe the Khalifa is truly guided by God.
Was there ever a situation where there would be two competing caliphs saying, I'm the caliph, no, you're not, I am? Has there ever been such a situation in Islamic history?
Yeah, very early. There were at the time of there was I'd say at least there was confusion, but there was definitely a battle at the time of the fourth Khalifa, where Muawiyah had an army, and there was another side with Ali, and there was a battle. So you cannot have two Khalifas, and so
it would be like having two popes.
Yeah, right. So it's just wrong in Islamic ideas. So yeah. So I kind of want to move on to a couple of other things, because I don't want it to be too theological, or just at least try it. Maybe I'm doing this the wrong way by going through too many ideas, but there were some basic ideas that I want to go through. So one thing was, what's not a solution is to fix rules so people become good, because bad people break rules, good rules. So, for example, how did the Iraq War happen? There were lots of rules, but because, Tony Blair and Bush Jr. aren't the best of people, they find ways round the rules. So the reason why I'm bringing this up, because I get the idea that you want to put rules in, but you don't necessarily want the people to... You're not expecting all people to become moral people. You're expecting the rules to make them somehow moral by forcing them to be moral. But I'm saying that won't work, because if you have immoral people, they'll get round the rules. What do you think about that?
I'm saying that once the laws of God are in place, belief will follow, because then it will become mainstream. And I think a lot of people pretend to believe in things that they don't really believe in, because to express skepticism would mean that, they could become marginalized and demonized. So, if it is a law, then it's arguably mainstream, and if it's mainstream, people will just go along with it, and okay. Basically, I think you need a pincer movement. You need to put the idea in people's heads that they would like this sort of thing, and then you can put it to our ruling classes that they would like such a thing too. And once they both agree, we can, move forward together.
Okay, so I can't see that happening because the ruling class quite like controlling people, and they don't like anything good to happen. They don't want fairness and justice and happiness for all. That seems to be quite clear. So I don't see that happening. Do you see that
Are
happening?
you saying they're all evil and incompetent? That
No, I'm saying the people who are controlling. No, so first let me clarify. So I do think the revolution is going to happen, but the revolution is not going to happen by saying to the ruling elite, who are quite happy controlling and abusing the general population, here are some rules where everybody's has their rights, and there'll be peace on earth. They're not the kind of people. The current ruling elite are not the kind of people who are going to accept it. I'm saying that there's going to be a grassroots revolution, which is going to eventually affect the. It's going to change the ruling elite. So I was going to come to that point later on, but I'll mention it
right.
now. Which is there's a hadith which says, your leaders are as you deserve. In fact,
Yes, people get the government they deserve.
yes.
Yes, I mean that's so true. But with regard to our ruling classes having a change of heart, what I imagined is this: that it is put to them that you ruling classes, wouldn't you like to do a better job? Wouldn't you like the people to like you instead of hating you and reviling you? And if you used a different moral system, don't you think things might be better? And here it is. You can do a better job using this new system, and you'll be more popular, and people will hate you less, and off you go. That would be my way of persuading them.
Right, yeah. So the only problem with that is if we look at the individual, you can, like, if I spoke to I don't know, somebody down the street, I don't want to pick on any particular person, let's just say, somebody X in society, and I said, listen, if you become Muslim, this will improve your life in 101 ways. And I'll logically give you information, and the problem is, that the likelihood of me just giving them data and them understanding and following the logic of it's just not going to happen. And it's the same reason why the elites are just other human beings who might be just more greedy or more powerful, and they don't see, basically they see their short-term ego controlling them. Even though they can see they're not being happy, they should logically realize that there is a God, and they're going to have to meet that God, etc., etc. So just giving them the information when they're already in many ways psychopathic, they're willing to kill millions of people, the chances of them listening to that, just because it makes sense doesn't mean they're going to take it on board. What are your thoughts about that?
I would expect there to be denial and rejection and neurosis, and in fact, I've been dealing with it for years. But I suppose the only way you can try to challenge that is to show that you believe in your idea, and you're going to continue saying, well, you don't have a better idea, do you? You really don't. And things are getting worse, and you are becoming increasingly paranoid and fearful. And and here's the solution. Why not? Why not just talk about it?
Okay. So I'm purposely not going to go this is all about sharing ideas, but we don't want to go around on one particular point. I think both sides of let's say, I think you've explained your idea well, and I've explained my idea on that. So my next idea is society is built from the ground up. So you start off with a happy person, then they're able to make a family. When I say happy, you know, stable, they've got certain values that keep them happy, then they're able with those values to form families, and therefore, and then after that form communities. And so the foundation of a revolution and a better society is not from the big rules, but it's actually from the most subtle ones that make a person happy. And you cannot police those with rules. So you, for example, there's a teaching in Islam, and you can call it part of the Sharia, which is deeds are judged by motives. So often we do things that will look good to other people, but doing the right thing based on your motives, that can't be policed. You can't make rules. You can't. So what I'm trying to get across is it's not the big rules that will affect everything. The whole of society is founded on, it starts from the individual, and if you don't have that, the whole of the rest of society collapses. What do you think about that?
Well, I think even individuals will sort of have to have certain rules for, like, well, we shouldn't kill, we shouldn't steal, that sort of thing. You don't think that's necessary? I'm not quite sure I understand.
Okay, so my point is that a functioning society, okay, so a lot of the problems we have in society are things like loneliness, okay, and loneliness comes from selfishness and egotistical choices. And if you keep, all of these things actually come from more and more subtle laws of behavior, such as the idea that deeds should be judged by motives. So you do things not because you're going to get a pat on the back or somebody's going to give you money, but you have the right intention before you do that thing. I'm not sure how. What I'm trying to get to is that society, the big society, only is stable when you have stable people at the bottom. That's the picture I'm trying to get. And having laws at a higher level, even laws from don't kill, and those are not enough to make a happier society. For example, let's say you say don't kill and I'm going to really punish you for not killing. That's not going to be enough for society to be functioning, to be a community, for people to treat each other as brothers and sisters. It depends on very subtle rules of behavior that can't be governed or policed.
I suppose you would have to produce a society in which people didn't feel like killing, or who would feel that, well, it would be a terrible thing if we were allowed to murder each other. And
I'm
I
not
think
saying don't have the rules. I'm just saying those rules aren't enough, and they don't stop. They don't fix the problem.
yes. So what you must see is in existence is that people who murder will be punished, or people will think, oh, it's one law for that lot and another law for us, and therefore we will do our thing because nobody really follows the law. People who follow the law are stupid and they get cheated, while the people at the top, they get away with murder. Obviously, you shouldn't have a society where people think like that.
Okay, so let me put it another way. There's a reason why everybody does something, even murder. There's a reason why people murder, and it all builds up from things lower down the psyche, let's say. So why would somebody murder? Let's say because they're jealous of something, they want something that somebody else has, and a lot of and so if you go further down, like if you talk about any self-help book, they all talk about the very subtle and small things, like wake up early in the morning, have a schedule. Like Jordan Peterson says, do your bedroom, for example. These are the foundations by which you develop as a good human being. And so laws like don't murder and we're going to really punish you if you do, they're useful at a certain level, but if you don't have the basics, you're setting people up to fail, in fact. Okay, because people murder for a reason, and that reason is there's lots of fundamental problems in their lives and they end up doing the wrong thing. They don't actually want to be killed or lose their hands for stealing or all these kind of things. So I'm not sure if that's making any sense. That you have to work on the fundamentals, otherwise you set people up for failure with these hard punishments.
Well, I suppose you produce a kind of society where people think they shouldn't do these things, and you see to it that those who do these things get punished.
But these
But
things, it won't
I,
happen. It won't happen by itself unless you've got a plan to make sure that happens.
yes, and you have to address people's belief systems. You have to say, well, we are the people who always do this and never do that. You still have to somehow define the group that you want to protect with your belief system. So I just don't see how you can get around that. But by saying, we Muslims do this, we Jews do that, we are good people. I think, the idea that, we are good people is also important. Good people with good values who deserve to survive and who treat each other kindly, for reasons of group solidarity, to better, to increase the likelihood of winning a successful defensive war. These ideas, I think, need to be present in all these people. But perhaps you're talking about the rule of law. And I think the rule of law, as far as I understand it, is the desire to obey the law because it is the law, because we trust the source of the law. And if we think that God is the source of these laws, we want to please God.
Okay, so yes, that comes over to my next point, which is the conviction to follow the law. So you're agnostic, and we were having, well, not exactly a discussion, but I said I'd bring this very important point up, is that I think you necessarily, if you want Islam to work for you, you should become a Muslim, and you need to believe that, like you said, there's a God behind these laws. These are not just man-made laws that happen to work that you're going to follow as an agnostic. It works much better if you've got the conviction that these laws are from God and they are perfect, because what's going to happen, they're in reality, outside the theoretical world, in reality life is uncertain. There's so many things that you're not sure why they're happening, and sometimes you'll have doubts as to should you really follow these Islamic laws if you don't believe in God. But if you do, if you know that God is behind these laws, and sometimes there's things you don't understand, but later on you find out why they happened. Muslims often say God is we plan, but God is the greatest planner, meaning, and that's kind of a paraphrased quote from the Koran. In this, what they mean by that is when they're not sure why something is happening, they can see God. Eventually, they see God had a plan, and it was for our benefit, and there was nothing beyond His control. And so that's really fundamental, a fundamental difference as to why Muslims are so calm in following their religion, where when I see atheists, and it is generally known, atheists suffer a lot more from depression because they see the world as uncertain. They can't see why things are happening. They do start from the point where everything is random, so there should be no reason why anything is happening. So there's so much uncertainty on that side, and if you come from a point, let's say you're an atheist, let's go to the extreme, and yet you see the benefits of the teaching of Islam, there'll be points in time when you think, I'm not going to follow this because something is not according to there are things that are happening that cannot be explained by my understanding the rules. So if I explain it one more way, Jordan Peterson is a really good example. He has academically understood that there is value behind these religious teachings, yet he suffers from a lot of depression. And I would say that's because he hasn't fully accepted that there is a living God behind these religious rules. I don't think there's living God behind Christianity. It doesn't make any sense. But if you are certain that there is a God behind the rules, there's far more conviction, and the belief. There are times when, so for example, circumcision. We know now that it helps against sexually transmitted diseases, but at the time of Prophet Muhammad they didn't know that, but they followed it anyway. So the belief goes ahead of the logic. There's some logic to show you that this is from God, and then you accept the rest of it. But if you don't believe it's from God, then you're going to be uncertain, and there's going to be a lack of conviction. Sorry about, I was just trying to explain it in as many ways as I can, but I spent a lot of time.
Yes, I think I know what you mean. I know the Jews have this idea of Emunah and Bitachon, and Emunah is the knowledge that God exists, and Bitachon is belief that God will act for a just reason, that he will act for the best of all possible reasons. So you don't need to fear that he will, do something evil. And then they gave an example, which is of Job's wife saying to him when he was suffering, and she says, curse God and die, which is, you're talking about God. Well, she was talking about God. She was telling her husband to curse God and then to die, which is, on the one hand, accepting the existence of God, but obviously, cursing God for bringing such terrible suffering to him. And I suppose you can, on the one hand, believe in God, but believe that he is evil and punishing you and it will all end terribly. Or you can believe that he is all merciful, and even if he's punishing you, there is a purpose to your suffering. You're meant to learn, and there will be a silver lining, coming eventually from this cloud you are currently under.
Right.
And if you think in this way, you will accept your suffering with more grace.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point, that if you know, every chapter of the Holy Quran starts with, I am Allah, the perfect God, who's the most gracious, ever merciful. So and that could be supported by the reality of the world in many ways. But then when you accept that, and that's who God is, then you can see every suffering is not without purpose, as you say. It's actually for your benefit in some way or the other, and that's why religious people seem to handle stress and difficulties far better than atheists do. Another point I wanted to make as part of that is that I cannot see, and let's see what you think about this. I cannot see a person who's agnostic or atheist following the religion, the rules of God, because I think, or in a realistic way, because there's a basic good or truth, which is to accept God in the first place. So let me explain that. God is self-evident in many ways. We can try to make up silly ideas as to why God doesn't exist, and there's all sorts of scientific comebacks to prove that he must exist, right? But it's actually quite evident. We know the computer we're using was made by somebody, even though we didn't see the creator, and we're far more complicated. It's too obvious that there is a God. And so if we cannot accept that basic truth, and we cannot even be good enough to accept that basic truth, because you have to be good to accept the kindness of God. Like if somebody gives you millions and millions of pounds and you don't acknowledge them, that's not good. And so God, who's giving you this, is that, I don't know what that is in the background.
I'm afraid it's my doorbell.
Oh, okay. Okay. So it's not good to ignore and not accept God. Do you know what I mean? Do you get the idea? So if you cannot be good enough to accept a basic truth and accept God who's giving you so much stuff, I don't have much hope for such people. This might sound harsh, but this is from my experience as well. That they're not going to be able to practice Islam to the level that it will benefit society and make the world a better place. What are your thoughts about that?
I think if you do something and you don't quite understand, but it produces good results, eventually you'll think, well, I didn't understand, but I did it anyway, and and look where I am, in a good place. Then people will, I think, commit to it, or even as I was explaining to somebody the other day, that you know what the rules are, and you decide to break them, hoping to get, because you felt naughty, you thought you'd get away with it, and you were punished. But the fact that you knew what the rule was and you still broke it is actually better than not knowing that you weren't supposed to do it at all. Because when you broke the rule and you knew that you were breaking the rule, you obviously knew you shouldn't have done it, and you suffered as a result. And this tends to reinforce the idea that you shouldn't do it, and would discourage you from trying to do it again. Then if you didn't know you weren't supposed to do it, you might try and do it again, when the urge to do it became irresistible. So I think rules are important.
So what the way you're putting things is, you're essentially saying people are logical, which is, I don't think that's that's far from reality. I would say we're ego driven. If we were logical, the world would be a very different place. What do you think about that?
I think we do a bit of both. We sometimes think logically and sometimes we don't. I don't think at the moment our society encourages us to think logically. In fact, we are often being manipulated subliminally, but by stories and suggestions to act emotionally, and it is not even particularly condemned when people are obviously being emotional and irrational. And but you can always encourage people to use logic by rewarding the people who use logic, instead of condemning them and calling them all kinds of names just because they said a truth that you can't argue against, which I think is more the case currently. You say it's a truth, and they can't argue against it, they can't deny the truth, but they're going to call you a name or two, just to assert status over you, I guess.
Okay, so another point I want to make is the UN human rights are actually based on, so when the UN was formed, there was a person called Chaudhry Zafrullah Khan. He was the first foreign secretary for Pakistan. He was also an Ahmadi Muslim, and he tried very hard to make the Charter for Human Rights based on the teachings of Islam. And so just looking at the first article, basically, which says everybody should be treated equally, we know that doesn't happen. You can look at like the Ukraine war versus the Yemen war, where we suddenly care because they're white people in Ukraine, but in the Yemen we're quite happy to ignore a war that's caused far more casualties and lasted far longer, but nobody cares about it. So you can see, despite these rules being there, people just ignore it. I suppose I'm repeating what I said right in the beginning, which is, if you don't have good people, they won't follow good rules. What do you think about that?
Well, is there'll be people who lie. You ask them to declare their principles and they say, oh, well, I'm Jewish, Christian, Muslim, and actually they lie. They only pretend to be, whatever religion they claim to be, because they instinctively know that if they said they were atheists, you would distrust them even more. So they claim to be a member of some religious group, but actually they ignore all the rules and they tell lies. But the fact is, by forcing them to commit to a list of principles, you can judge them. If they say, well, I'm a Muslim, and then you catch them, eating pork and drinking alcohol in the casino, they're not a good sort of Muslim, and they would be a very low status kind of Muslim. And the same with a Jew, going to a football match on Saturday, they're not the observant kind of Jew. So these rules are very helpful in allowing us to measure the morality of the person that we're talking to.
Yeah, I agree that they do make things clearer when you have clear rules about what's right and wrong, and that's one of the great things about Islam. There are red lines, as it were, and says this is what you do, this is what you don't do. I say red lines, but there's freedom of faith, so you can always cross those red lines, but at least you're clear about what's wrong and right. In society right now, we don't know if you should have sex with a cat or not, because there are no rules. Do you know what I mean? So that does help, but it doesn't stop people from slipping down that slope and saying, you know what, I will break that rule because I'm just not a good Muslim, and you'll just go further and further down until you're not practicing it. So that's how I feel about that. But my last point before I kind of want to wind up is that if we look at how the revolution is currently happening, which is, Islam is the fastest growing religion by far, it's not because people are forced to follow rules. I wouldn't say there's too much policing. There might be some level of social policing, but there's very little social policing, I say, especially in the West, in terms of making people follow the rules. It's because people are convinced that these rules are firstly from God, and secondly they help. But it's very much secondly, I would say secondly, it does make sense. So what I'm trying to get across is that it wasn't policing all the rules that forced people into being good. It's just they knew it was from God and it helped them. What are your thoughts about that?
I think if we agree with the rules, it's like a kind of social contract, isn't it? You ask somebody, do you think there should be laws against murder? They'll say yes, because they don't want to be murdered, and therefore they understand the principle of reciprocity. If they don't want to be murdered, then they shouldn't be allowed to murder. And the same applies to, theft and committing sexual offences. But maybe, sexual offences is a very elastic term. But I suppose the idea is to make everybody within the group saying, well, it's fair enough, that there should be laws forbidding all these annoying, dangerous, evil things. And once most people agree to these laws, then people will be more observant of them and actually want to obey them and enforce them and police each other and assume that that's the right thing to do. It's only when you get a fractured society, when they mostly don't agree with the rules, or they think they're unfair, they're imposed by evil, corrupt people who don't care about their own society, then you will get people wishing to avoid and evade these laws.
Okay, so my last comment, I suppose, which would be sort of rounding back to the beginning of what I said, and basically on how the revolution will happen, is I'll go back to the verse of the Holy Quran I mentioned, which is, truth has come and falsehood becomes unaffected by it. Falsehood does indeed vanish away fast, meaning that the revolution is essentially by the truth of the teaching of Islam. It's so clear and it's so far more powerful, far more logical than any other alternate ideas, that it is destroying all other ideas, and that's how the revolution is happening, through the spreading of truth. And when people really understand the value of all the teachings, they benefit from it and they become better people, and other people follow them, and societies grow until they encompass the whole of, did I say other societies grow? The society of Muslims grow and become larger and larger until it's the only society, whereas the rest of society is collapsing. So that's how I see the revolution is happening. That's how I see happiness is growing. That's how I see justice is going to grow. That's kind of my final statement. I'd like you to say the last word, and I'm going to break my fast while you're talking.
Right. I see the revolution as happening the moment people sense that something's not quite right with their society. And I think the biggest problem comes from America, and they can't deny that they don't have an official religion, and that they can't say, oh, we don't need one. You know, they'll probably say, oh, but we want it to be Christianity. And we can point out to them that the whole point of the American Republic was to escape from Christianity and monarchy, because Christianity was what supported monarchy. And obviously the founding fathers had had enough of that. And I guess the next thing to say to the Americans is that they don't understand their own history if they don't understand that the American Revolution was a rejection of Christianity and monarchy. And if they want to go back to Christianity again, they'll be regressing, because I know some of them are even talking about wanting a king, because they want some, strong man to, save them from this terrible situation that they're now in. But that would be not understanding their own history. And my position also is that, if the First Amendment is based on Chapter 2, verse 256 of the Koran, then they should gladly acknowledge that the American Republic was founded on the most important Islamic principle, giving the most important human right of all, freedom of belief.
Okay, cool. So, and I suppose we did say in the beginning that we would cover 3 questions, but that was, I think it wasn't sensible to go to the other 2 questions, because what I've underestimated is that you actually have a genuine interest in all of these things, and we needed to go into some level of depth of that discussion. And how the revolution, how the world will change is not actually a small topic that could, So I'm learning how the sort of the dynamics of our conversations go, and I'm used to doing really short 20-minute videos where people don't not argue too much, or maybe just, I don't know what it is. Maybe there's a different dynamic in Speaker's Corner, but I like to go with the flow, and I really appreciate your time and your interest, and helping me clarify the teachings of Islam to the viewers here, and so hopefully it will benefit some people, because I do think every time we clarify some of these teachings, maybe somebody will be inspired to follow those teachings and change their lives, because that's the only interest I have. What would you like to say to finish off the video?
I think it's been very helpful. I suppose these things are very difficult to control, and I've always felt that you do kind of need, to give time for the theme to be developed, and the conversation to follow, its logical path, because if people listen, they're thinking, well, why didn't they ask that question? Why didn't they discuss that question? And so I guess it might not be a good idea to say, well, in 1 hour we're going to discuss, 1, 2, 3. But the thing is, you can always clip the good bits and say, this these 5 minutes illustrate my point or whatever. So I don't think you should despair. I sort of feel that I don't think I've given you the answers you wanted, but I'm very happy to be questioned again.
Whenever I do things, I see. It's not that I want certain answers. It would be nice, let's say, in a very simple world, that everything just works out exactly how you planned it. But put it simply, I see myself as a servant of God. God knows the plan, and I think I really appreciate the value you bring by giving the alternate point of view to help people who are watching the video to decide for themselves. So anyway, thank you so much. Shall we end the live stream here, and then we could have a off-screen chat as to how you felt it went and all that kind of stuff. How does that
Okay.
work? Yeah.
Okay, I'll do that now. So thank you everyone for listening, and I'm ending the broadcast now.